All right, so get ready to maybe do a little scratching as we dive into this one. We're going deep on scabies today.
Oh yeah, it's a good one. It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's heard of scabies, but not everybody really knows what it is. We've got a ton of research articles and medical guidelines kind of ready to go.
Yeah, and it's a pretty common condition. More common than people think, I think.
So, for the listener out there, our mission today is to really uncover the science behind it, how to treat it, how to prevent it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting new research that's come out about these little guys, too. It's amazing what they're finding out about them.
So, starting from the basics, what is scabies? I mean, we know it's itchy, but what's happening under the skin?
Yeah, well, it's caused by this microscopic mite. Imagine something the size of a period at the end of a sentence that's burrowing into the top layer of your skin.
Okay.
And they actually, they set up shop there, right? They lay eggs, they feed, they create these little tunnels.
Oh, that's pretty creepy. Kind of already starting to feel itchy just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant thought.
So I mean, I'm guessing it's not just the burrowing that causes the itch, right? What else is happening there?
Right. It's actually an allergic reaction, right, to the mites themselves, their waste products, even their eggs. So just constant, like, low-level allergic response happening.
I see. So like a constant histamine reaction.
Pretty much, yeah. And it can be pretty intense, especially at night. That's when it seems to be the worst for a lot of people.
And they're leaving little trails behind too, right? Like little tracks.
Yeah, they are. They're called burrows, and you can sometimes actually see them on the skin. They look like these thin, wavy lines.
Oh, wow. So you're not only dealing with these invisible mites, but you can see the evidence of what they're doing.
Right. It's a bit unsettling.
Yeah, that's definitely enough to make you want to scratch. So how do they spread? Like, how do you get scabies in the first place?
The most common way is through direct skin-to-skin contact. We're talking like prolonged contact.
Yeah.
Like holding hands, hugging, things like that.
So maybe choose your cuddle buddies wisely.
Right. But there's good news for pet owners.
Yeah.
You can't actually catch scabies from your furry friends.
Wait, really? So my dog can have mange and I don't have to worry about it?
Nope. Mange in animals is caused by a different type of mite. It's specific to their species.
Oh, interesting.
They can't survive on human skin.
Well, that's a relief. So I don't have to worry about, like, catching mange from my dog. But, I mean, so skin-to-skin contact, that's not the only way, right?
Right. You can also get it from contaminated items like bedding, clothing, towels, anything that's been in close contact with an infected person's skin.
That makes sense.
It's less common, though, because the mites can't survive very long away from a human host.
Okay. So it's not impossible to get it from, like, trying on clothes in a store.
Not impossible, but less likely.
But good to be mindful.
Yeah, definitely.
So now let's talk about the part everybody wants to know about. Treatment. How do you get rid of these things?
So the gold standard is a topical medication called permethrin.
I've heard of that. It's prescription, right?
Yeah, you need a doctor to prescribe it.
Yeah.
But it's very effective. Kills the mites. The key is, making sure you apply it correctly. And that means applying it everywhere, like from the neck down, every inch of skin.
Whoa. Every inch. Really?
Yeah, even under your fingernails. You don't miss any spots.
Okay, so that's a whole process.
It is, but it's important. And usually you leave it on for 14 hours and then wash it off.
I see.
And then you repeat the whole process a week later to get any newly hatched mites.
So it's a two-part treatment.
Right, to make sure you get them all.
What about people who can't use permethrin, like pregnant women or babies? Are there other options for them?
Yeah, there are. So there's sulfur ointment that's often used. And sometimes the doctor might prescribe an oral medication called ivermectin.
Okay. So there are options.
Yes.
But it's not just treating yourself, right? If you're living with other people, they need to be treated too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everyone in the household and any close contacts need to be treated at the same time.
Otherwise, you're just going to pass them back and forth.
Exactly. It's a team effort.
Okay. So let's talk about what happens after the treatment. Let's say you've done the treatment, everybody in your house has done the treatment, and you think you're in the clear, and then the itching comes back.
Yeah. That's what we call post-scabies itch, and it's really common, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It can be pretty frustrating.
So you're telling me the mites are gone, but you're still itchy.
Yeah, basically. It's your immune system. It's still reacting to the remnants of the mites. The waste products, the damage to your skin. It's like the party's over, but the cleanup is still going on.
I see. So how long does that usually last?
It varies, but usually it goes away within a few weeks. It's not a sign that the treatment failed. It's just your body's still working on things.
Okay, that's reassuring, I guess. But can you do anything to ease the itching while you're waiting for it to go away?
Yeah. Keeping your skin moisturized helps. And you can take an over-the-counter antihistamine, too. That can block the allergic reaction.
So basic itch relief.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And, of course, if it's really severe or it's not getting better, you should see your doctor.
Yeah, good advice.
Yeah.
Better safe than sorry. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about preventing scabies from coming back in the first place. I mean, nobody wants to go through this whole thing again, right?
Right. Prevention is definitely key. And it's not just about good hygiene. I mean, these might spread through contact, right?
Right. So you could be, the cleanest person in the world, but if you come into contact with somebody who has scabies, you can still get it.
Exactly.
Okay, so what can we do? What are the best ways to prevent it?
It's really all about being mindful of your environment. Like if you know someone has scabies, just be careful about sharing personal items. Avoid close contact until they've finished treatment.
So just being aware of the potential risks.
Right. And if you think you might have it, the best thing you could do is get treated as soon as possible to protect the people around you.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned earlier that crusted scabies is really contagious. Just how contagious are we talking?
Oh, it's very contagious. A person with crusted scabies can have millions of mites on their skin.
Millions. Whoa.
Yeah, and they're shedding them all the time, so the risk of transmission is really high.
So that's not just a few extra guests at the party. That's like a whole invasion.
That's a good way to put it.
Mm.
And it really highlights the importance of early detection and treatment.
Yeah, especially in places like nursing homes and hospitals where you have vulnerable people.
Exactly. So healthcare workers need to be really vigilant about identifying and managing these cases.
Absolutely. Now let's talk a little bit about the psychological impact of scabies. I mean, it's not just a physical thing, right? This can really mess with people's minds.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the constant itching can be really distressing. People lose sleep, they get anxious, some even get depressed.
And then there's the stigma too. People feel ashamed, embarrassed to talk about it.
Right. And that can make it even worse because they might delay getting treatment, which means they're more likely to spread it. It's important to remember, it's a medical condition. It's not a reflection of their personal hygiene.
Absolutely. We need to break down that stigma and make sure people feel comfortable getting help. So it's really important to talk about this openly.
I agree.
And if you're experiencing symptoms, don't be afraid to see your doctor.
Exactly. Early diagnosis and treatment are key.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier some fascinating new research developments. What's happening in the fight against scabies? What are scientists excited about?
Well, there's a lot going on. One area is new drug therapies. For decades, we've relied on permethrin and a few other medications. But we need new treatments, especially because there's a chance the mites could develop resistance over time.
Oh, I see. So it's like we're always trying to stay one step ahead of them.
Exactly. So, for instance, some researchers are looking at drugs that can disrupt the mite's ability to, feed or reproduce.
Okay.
And others are working on medications that can be taken orally, which would be a huge improvement for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. Much easier than applying cream all over your body.
Right. And potentially more effective.
That's amazing. So it sounds like there's a lot of hope on the horizon for people who are dealing with scabies.
Definitely. And there's other interesting research going on, too, like looking at the mite's genetics.
Okay. What's the point of that?
Well, if we can map out the mite's entire genome, we might be able to identify vulnerabilities that we can exploit.
So we're basically trying to, find the mite's Achilles heel. Fascinating. It's amazing how much we can learn from something so tiny. But we haven't talked much about, the current state of treatment and prevention around the world. Are there certain places where people have less access to care?
Yeah, unfortunately there are. In many low-income countries, resources are limited and the healthcare systems are struggling.
So while we're talking about all this cutting-edge research, there are people who don't even have access to basic treatment.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to advocate for more funding and support for scabies control programs in those regions.
Because everyone deserves access to effective treatment, no matter where they live.
Absolutely. We need to address these disparities, and it's going to take a multi-pronged approach. Improving healthcare infrastructure, access to medications, and public health education.
It's a big challenge, but it's something we can't ignore. Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to the stigma surrounding scabies. It seems like a lot of people are really afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. The stigma can prevent people from seeking treatment, and it can make them feel isolated and ashamed.
And it's so unnecessary because it's a common condition. It's
Well,
easily treatable. It's not like, it's their fault or anything.
exactly. It's just one of those things that can happen to anyone.
So how do we break down that stigma? What can we do?
I think education is key. We need to make sure people understand that scabies is not a sign of being dirty or unhygienic.
Right. It's just a medical condition, like catching a cold.
Exactly. And we need to emphasize that getting treatment is nothing to be ashamed of. It's the responsible thing to do, both for yourself and for the people around you.
Absolutely. So it's all about education, open communication, breaking down those misconceptions. I think that's a really important message for our listeners.
I agree. The more we talk about it, the less power it has over us.
Well said. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into scabies. We've talked about the science, the stigma, the global impact, but there's still so much more to explore.
Definitely. There are some really exciting developments in scabies research that we haven't even touched on yet.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve into those cutting-edge research breakthroughs and what they mean for the future of scabies treatment and prevention.
It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of scabies.
Before the break, we were talking about scabies prevention and all the things you can do to avoid those little mites.
It can feel like you're constantly battling them.
Yeah, so what else can we do? What are some of the maybe less obvious ways to prevent scabies from coming back?
One thing is just being mindful of your surroundings.
Mm.
Like if you know someone who has scabies,
Right.
just be extra careful about sharing personal items or being in close contact with them. Until they've finished treatment, of course.
So, like, not being a germaphobe, but just, like, thinking about it.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting others, too.
Right.
If you think you might have scabies, it's really important to get treated right away to prevent spreading it.
Makes sense. Speaking of spreading, you mentioned earlier that crested scabies is super contagious. Like, how contagious are we talking?
It's really bad. Actually, a person with crusted scabies can have millions of mites on their skin.
Millions.
Yeah, and they're constantly shedding them. So the risk of spreading it is really high.
Wow, that's a lot of mites.
It is. It's why early detection and treatment are so important, especially in places like nursing homes or hospitals, where people are more vulnerable.
Yeah, an outbreak there could be really serious.
Absolutely. So healthcare workers have a big responsibility to identify and manage these cases.
For sure.
Huh.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the psychological impact of scabies. It's not just physical, right?
Oh, absolutely not. The constant itching can be so stressful, people can't sleep. They get anxious, depressed.
Right. And then there's the stigma, too.
Exactly. People feel ashamed or embarrassed to even talk about it.
It's just going to make everything worse, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
They might wait to get treatment, which means they can spread it more. It's really important to remember that this is a medical condition. It's not anyone's fault.
It's not a reflection of their hygiene or anything like that.
Exactly.
So we need to make sure people feel comfortable talking about it and getting help.
I agree. And that includes talking to their doctor.
Mm.
If you're experiencing symptoms, don't be afraid to bring it up.
Yeah, your doctor's there to help you.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's get to the exciting stuff. You were talking about new research developments earlier. What's going on in the fight against scabies? What are scientists working on?
Well, one really interesting area is new drug therapies.
Mm.
For a long time, we've been using permethrin and a few other medications, but we need new options. The mites could become resistant to those eventually.
So it's like an arms race.
Kinda, yeah. We're always trying to stay ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Some researchers are looking at drugs that can actually disrupt the mite's ability to feed or reproduce, for example.
Oh, wow.
And others are working on medications that you could take orally instead of having to apply cream all over.
Oh, that would be much easier.
Right, and potentially more effective, too.
So there's a lot of hope for new treatments on the horizon.
Definitely. And another area that's really interesting is the research into the mite's genetics.
Oh, right. You mentioned that. What's the goal there?
Well, if we can map out the mite's entire genome, we might be able to find its weak spots.
It's like figuring out its Achilles heel.
Exactly. Then we can target those weak spots with new treatments.
So it's not just about finding new ways to kill the mites, it's about understanding them better.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Now, we talked about access to treatment earlier. Are there any other disparities we should be aware of, like in terms of prevention or education?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in Many parts of the world, people don't even have basic information about scabies.
So they might not even know how to prevent it or how to get treatment.
Right. And that's why public health education is so important. We need to make sure people have access to accurate information about scabies, how it spreads, and what to do if they think they might have it.
Because knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. The more people know about scabies, the less they have to fear it.
And the less stigma there will be.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about new treatments, genetic research, and the importance of education. What else is on the horizon for scabies research? Anything else you're excited about?
Well, one thing that's really generating a lot of buzz is the possibility of a vaccine for scabies.
A vaccine.
Seriously.
Yeah, it's still in the early stages of research, but it's a really promising avenue. If we could develop a vaccine, that would be huge.
It would be a game changer, especially in places where scabies is really common.
Exactly. It could protect individuals and also help to stop the spread of scabies within communities.
That's incredible. So it seems like there's a lot to be optimistic about in the fight against scabies. I think so. We're learning more about these mites all the time, and we're developing new tools to combat them. I think the future of scabies control is looking brighter than ever.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into scabies.
We've talked a lot about the present, but I think it's time to look ahead. What's next in the fight against scabies?
Yeah, what's the future look like? What are researchers working on? What are they most excited about?
Well, there are a few things that I think have the potential to really change how we deal with scabies.
Okay.
One of them is new drug therapies.
Yeah.
Like we talked about earlier, we need new treatments because the mites might develop resistance to the ones we have now.
Right.
And some scientists are focusing on disrupting the mites' molting process.
Molting process.
Yeah, so basically the mites have to shed their exoskeleton to grow, right? Kind of like a snake shedding its skin.
Okay.
And there's this specific protein that's really important for that process. So the idea is if you can develop a drug that targets that protein, you can basically stop the mites from maturing and reproducing.
Interesting. So instead of just killing the mites that are already there, you're preventing future generations from even happening.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. What about those oral medications we were talking about? Any progress on that front?
Yeah, there's some exciting research going on there too. They're looking at new drugs that seem to be really good at killing the mites, even the ones that are buried deep under the skin.
And since they're oral, that would make things a lot easier for people.
Right. No more having to apply cream all over your body.
Which I imagine can be a real pain, especially for people with, crusted scabies.
Exactly. And they might even be better at preventing reinfestation.
Wow. So lots of potential there. You also mentioned genetic research earlier. What are they finding out about the mites genes?
So the idea is if we can map the entire genome of the scabies mite, we can figure out which genes are essential for its survival and reproduction, and maybe even its ability to evade our immune system.
Kind of like creating a blueprint of the enemy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And once you know how the enemy works, you can figure out how to defeat it. So they're looking for vulnerabilities, basically.
That's really interesting. And it could potentially have implications for treating other parasitic infections, too.
Yeah, absolutely. The things we learned about scabies could help us fight other parasites as well.
Wow. That's really cool. But we haven't talked much about prevention yet. What's happening in that area?
Well, this is a big one. Researchers are actually trying to develop a vaccine for scabies.
A vaccine? No way.
Yeah, it's still in the early stages, but if it works, it could be huge. Imagine being able to protect people from scabies with a simple vaccine.
That would be amazing, especially in places where scabies is really common.
Exactly. It could potentially eliminate scabies as a public health problem in those areas.
Wow, that's incredible. So even though scabies can be really frustrating and uncomfortable, it seems like there's a lot of hope for the future.
I think so. We're learning more about these mites all the time, and we're developing new ways to fight them. So, yeah, I'm optimistic.
Well, that's great to hear, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling more optimistic too. So, to wrap things up, we've learned a lot about scabies in this deep dive. It's a common condition, but it's treatable. And there's some really exciting research happening that could change the way we deal with scabies in the future.
Absolutely.
So if you're experiencing any symptoms of scabies, don't be afraid to talk to your doctor, get the treatment you need, and remember, you're not alone.
And stay tuned for more deep dives into fascinating and important health topics.
Thanks for listening.